Every day, this dog looked into a storm drain. When it was finally opened, people were shocked to see what was there. There were a lot of stray dogs in many countries, but there was one dog whose actions truly intrigued people. A dirty, shaggy stray puppy was walking down the street in Turkey, which used to be called Turkey. He did this every day as he looked for any food or water he could find. The dog was happy to walk down the street and wag his tail at anyone who looked at him. It was a normal start to the day. The dog lived on the streets, but it was very friendly and loved getting pets from people who passed by. The animal was walking down a street when, all of a sudden, he smelled something tasty. He went with his nose until he was in front of a food store that sold meat. While people bought big chunks of meat for dinner, the dog watched through the window. The dog's stomach let out a loud growl when it saw the food. It made him realize how hungry he was. An attractive young woman named Annie was paying for 2 big steaks inside the store. She thanked the butcher and she left the shop when she was done. Annie walked down the street to her house after getting outside when she heard a loud gurgle and a quiet whimper. When the young woman who was lost turned around, she saw the stray dog staring back at her with sad eyes. Annie knew right away what was wrong when the dog's stomach growled again. It was obviously a stray dog that was very hungry. Annie felt bad for the hungry animal as soon as she saw it. As she walked back into the butcher's shop, she looked down at the steaks she had just bought and asked if he had any cut-offs or bones that he wouldn't sell. It made the butcher happy to give the woman what she asked for. Annie left the store and looked for the lost dog outside. He was watching her from afar right away. The woman knelt down on the ground and carefully held out the bone she had given him. The dog was wary at first and didn't want to get too close to the woman, but the longer she held out the food, the more the animal wanted it and couldn't stop himself from getting it. Annie eventually gained the animal's sufficient trust for him to begin wagging his tail and stealing the large bone from her. However, the dog didn't eat the food right away. He picked it up and started walking away, as if he had somewhere to be. Annie didn't want to ask too many questions about the dog's behavior, so she just got back up and went back home. Annie saw the same stray dog from the day before as she walked down the street the next day. The animal seemed to have seen her too, because it happily ran up to her with its tail wagging. Annie smiled at how excited the dog was to see her and put her arms around him. The young woman had to go somewhere, so she couldn't spend too much time with the animal. She did, however, make sure to get the dog some sausages from a nearby store before she left. Again, though, the dog didn't eat them right away. Instead, it walked away. Annie was interested in how the animal was acting, but she didn't have time to follow him because she had to go about her day. On the 3rd day, Annie found the stray dog again, but this time, it looked like he was ready for her. The woman began carrying treats in her bag in the hopes that she could give them to the poor stray. The young woman smiled as she walked up to the dog and gave it some treats. This time, Annie started to follow the dog when it turned around and walked away. After some time, they reached a busy street. Annie watched as the shaggy dog walked over to a storm drain. The dog took a seat next to the drain and looked down into it. After Annie had just given him a treat, he dropped one of them into it and then ate his own. The young woman didn't understand anything. Just what did the dog do? That dog would sit and stare into the storm drain for a few days, Annie saw. When she gave the animal treats, he would always throw half of them down the drain before eating his own. Annie finally got so interested that she decided to go check out what was so interesting in the drain for herself. But she wasn't ready for what she found. Annie slowly made her way to the storm drain, being careful of the dog that was watching over it. But the dog did nothing but watch the young woman with interest. The first time Annie stood right above the drain, she gasped when she saw what she saw. The young woman grabbed her phone right away and called the fire department. They would definitely need to help her. After about 20 minutes, 2 firefighters arrived and asked the woman what was wrong. The men got right to work after Annie told them what she had seen. The stray dog started to growl at them as they walked over to the storm drain. The firefighters stopped because they didn't want to get bit. Annie knew what to do, which was lucky for them. She slowly walked up to the dog and told it that the men were only there to help. Then she held out a treat for the dog. When he finally came over to take it, she grabbed him to keep him away from the drain and the firefighters. The firefighters began to open the storm drain once the stray animal was out of their way. Since the drain was in the middle of a busy street, a lot of people had gathered around the firefighters to see what they were doing. The firefighters finally showed what the stray dog had been so interested in inside the drain after a few tense minutes. They had a little kitten in one of their arms. Everyone who saw it was shocked, but that wasn't the end of it. They went back into the storm drain 4 more times. He always had a kitten in his arms when he came up. Annie couldn't believe what she was seeing. She knew there was something down there because she had seen it when she peeked in, but she had no idea the 5 cute little kittens were stuck. The stray dog got out of Annie's arms at that very moment and ran over to the firefighters who were holding the kittens. When the dog saw the little cats, he started to wag his tail and sniff them right away. The kittens meowed back at the dog. It was Annie who went up to the firefighters and asked them how the kittens got into such a bad situation. The firefighters told her that it was likely they were swept into the drain during a heavy rainstorm. However, since they were stuck, they weren't hungry. When Annie heard this, she looked over at the stray dog. She knew that the kittens had lived because he shared his food with them every day. Annie knew what she was going to do next after seeing someone do something so kind and selfless. They told her they could take the kittens home and care for them until they were ready to go to a new home. This made the firefighters agree, so they gave Annie the kittens. Following her first steps back home, the young woman turned around and called the stray dog. She told him, "Come on, Benny, it's time to go home." The dog happily ran up to her and took care of all the kittens. When the kittens were old enough to move, he found 4 of them loving homes. She kept one for herself because she loved them so much. Also, Annie fell in love with the shaggy dog and couldn't bear to leave him on the streets after what he did for the cats. Benny finally had a place to call home. People in the family were happy together. Fudge, the cat, and Benny were not at all worried that they would have to live on the streets again because Annie loved them too much and they loved her back. What a wonderful story. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what do you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more great stories.